Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I like listening to sports talk radio and occasionally watching some sports talk on TV on ESPN. And sports talk radio used to be opinion and analysis and some strategy and some predictions and talking about the coaching and the injuries and things of that nature. But now sports talk radio has devolved into basically these outrageous hot takes that are super polarizing, over-the-top reactions from the other person on the sports talk radio show, and then what seems like a lot of yelling at each other. And, if those of you that actually, watch some things on ESPN, Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee are kind of examples of that, but local sports talk radio has kind of devolved into hot takes, over-the-top reaction, and a lot of yelling. Well, I got to thinking about that, and I don't know about me, but I wonder if you've noticed that a lot of people just seem to go from 0 to 100 over things that objectively just aren't that big of a deal. And everything's a hot take. Everything is mad in the comments, choosing sides, us versus them, so on and so forth. And when I say things that are objectively not a big deal, I just heard recently on the radio that this person got into trouble for how they reacted at a restaurant over the price of these shrimp skewers were supposed to be included in the meal, or they were $3.99 and they wanted to make him pay $5.99, and it just turned into this huge thing. And it's like, dude, that is not that big of a deal. And it could be someone's opinion on the internet. I remember about a year ago, I was in the grocery store part of Walmart, and the person in front of me was giving the cashier a really hard time about the way that they were bagging their groceries, and they are super upset. And now you hear about it, like the disputes with a neighbor that used to just kind of get worked out, and then every once in a while, super rarely, there would be a problem. Now it's just, boom, everything escalates immediately, and there's lawyers involved, and there's just so many disagreements, road rage, shouting, screaming. It just seems like that's ubiquitous in our lives right now. And recently I was reading in the local news, this was the first paragraph of the story. Quote, Andrea Bucci, 38 years old, of Franklin Park, is facing assault charges and was banned from the Robert Morris University Island Sports Complex for what police described as an altercation with a 16-year-old referee who ejected her son from a youth hockey game for unsportsmanlike conduct, end quote. This woman is facing assault charges for an altercation with a 16-year-old ref at a youth sports hockey game. So what is going on? Well, what's going on is what some people have labeled the Age of Outrage, or some people call it outrage culture. And it's not that people are upset. It's not that people are annoyed. It's not that people are frustrated. It's that people go from 0 to outrage almost instantly. And this shows up at school too, right? In parent emails with the capital letters and the exclamation points. Maybe your parents have some behavior stuff at sporting events, or someone wanting to make a scene at back to school night or in the lobby of the school. And then certainly when it comes to the parent group text or the parents' Facebook page, 0 to 100 in 1.2 seconds. So what are we going to do about it as private school leaders? This age of outrage. Are we just going to give up? Or are we going to say, well, you know how the parents are? No, that's not what we do on this podcast. we figure it out, and then we have strategies that will make it better. So on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we're going to discuss how to navigate the age of outrage with the parents at your school. And the way that we're going to do that is to define the age of outrage, spend a moment talking about when did the age of outrage begin, what are contributing factors to this outrage culture, what are the 5 signs of the age of outrage, how outrage culture can show up in private schools with your parents. And then I want you to stick around because the most important part of the episode is that I'm then going to give you 7 strategies to help you navigate outrage culture with your parents at your school. So we're talking about parents on today's episode, and I've been mentioning over the past few weeks that about 20 private school leaders have purchased Parent Academy to use as part of their teacher in-service in August. And in fact, just in the past week, I know of schools in Minnesota, Idaho, Texas, and Tennessee that use the 2 plug-and-play PDs as part of their back-to-school teacher in-service. And the feedback that I'm getting has been excellent. And there's still time, especially if you are in the Northeast or the Midwest or on the Pacific Coast, there's still time for you to get this in front of your teachers. And so Parent Academy contains 2 45-minute webinars that are teacher PDs. It comes with a 27-page printable notebook that you print out on the school's copier, 3-hole punch it, put it in a binder, and that's their guided notes and discussion questions. And what I'm hearing from private school leaders is that not only are the teachers engaged, but they're having some great discussions, and that they're already seeing kind of a culture shift in their school by using Parent Academy. So there's still time. You can still get this in front of your teachers. Just go to the privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy to learn more. The privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And then speaking of parents, I want to give you a free gift just to say thank you for listening to the podcast every week. This is called the 7 Steps to Having Successful Meetings with Upset Parents. You know, we're talking about outrage on our podcast episode today. And this is an 11-page PDF guide that gives you a step-by-step plan to have a better meeting with an upset parent at your school. And I think that every good coach has a game plan and every good teacher has a lesson plan, but I think that too many private school leaders don't have a plan when they sit down to meet with an upset parent. Well, now you have a plan, and you can grab this guide at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. Again, that's the 7 steps to having successful meetings with upset parents. You can grab that for free at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. So at the top, I said we're going to define the age of outrage, talk about when did it begin, what are some contributing factors to it, what are 5 signs that this is happening, how does this show up at your school, and then most importantly, I'm going to give you 7 strategies to help you navigate outrage culture, the age of outrage with the parents at your school. So let's start with giving this a definition. What is the age of outrage? Well, I want to start by saying we've got listeners in 68 countries, but mainly I'm referring to American culture when I'm talking about this and defining it. And it's the social climate, the current cultural climate in America where anger and emotional reactions and just this sense of indignation and outrage just dominates public discourse. And this is especially true in politics and media and other online spaces, but I've already told you how it's showing up in sports and entertainment, and everybody seems to be outraged about something. And I know I'm using extreme language there by saying everybody, but I think that this age of outrage, the outrage culture that we're seeing in, online spaces and attached to politics and media, and certainly we saw it during COVID with all of the frustration and debates and outrage surrounding the vaccinations. But I think that it's also becoming more commonly seen in customer service interactions, like at a restaurant or at a grocery store or at the auto mechanic, and unfortunately also at our schools. So when did the Age of Outrage begin? Well, most thought leaders that are writing about outrage in America and outrage culture are pointing to the years between 2010 and 2016 as when it really, really took off. And social media beginning in the mid to early 2000s. Twitter started in 2006. Instagram started in 2010. And then we had the 2016 presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And that seemed to just really escalate the comments and the interactions online. And then the thing that kind of poured gasoline on that fire that was already burning was the 2020 pandemic. But let's pause and consider what are some contributing factors to the Age of Outrage, because this wasn't always the case. If this is a thing that's present in American culture today, like, how did we get here? So I was reading a Harvard Business Review article by Karthik Ramanna called Managing in the Age of Outrage, and I'll link that in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 148. But in this article, Karthik Ramanna said that it's a perfect storm of three things. And those three things are, number one, many people feel unhopeful about the future. Number two, many feel, rightly or wrongly, that the game has been rigged against them. Culture is rigged against them. And number three, many are being drawn toward ideologies that legitimize an us versus them approach. So I just want to hit you with that one more time. This author, Karthik Ramanna, believes that how we got here is a perfect storm of people feel unhopeful about the future, feel that the game or culture or society has been rigged against them, and then number three, are drawn toward ideologies that legitimize us versus them approaches. So that sounds pretty correct to me. And in some of the research that went into that article, people are feeling pretty unhopeful about the future, more so than in many past generations. And so that's part of it. And then there are some other factors. So social media is an amplifying force. So it used to be that if you were really upset about something, that let's say you went to the diner or the corner bar or the senior citizen center or the people that were sitting nearby at the high school football game on Friday night, like the people in your little area, the people in your life, those were the people that you talked to, disagreed with, told them how you felt. Well, now with social media, we can have an opinion and have people agree or disagree with that all over the world. And we can then find other people who agree with us. And then that leads to the second factor, which is increased polarization and echo chambers. And so you know what an echo chamber is. You only talk to and get your media from people who agree with the way that you think. And then that verifies and validates that what you believe is true. And we kind of ignore facts or new information. And so there's an increased polarization, echo chambers, social media, combine those together. And then another factor contributing to the Age of Outrage is a rapid, widespread influx of misinformation. And, this could have been about COVID and vaccines. It could be about books in the library at the local school. It could be about presidential candidates. It could be about the local police force. It could be about, just this, pretty much anything. Like, there's generally never been more mistrust for people that are in authority. I told you a few weeks back on an episode that 58% of Americans say that they trust a stranger more than they trust their boss. So we've got lack of trust, misinformation, and then with social media, we also have anonymity and reduced inhibition because of the ability to hide behind a username. And so we're going to say things on social media, many people do, with that they would never say to another person. They're going to agree to things that they would never agree to if other people in their life knew they were agreeing to it. So we've got that kind of toxic mix going on there. And then finally, how did we get here? We have changing cultural norms around speaking up. Now, this one's a little tricky because people are speaking up against bullying and sexual harassment in the workplace with the Me Too movement that kind of started around 2006, 2007. Of course, sexual abuse of children. Many organizations have faced a reckoning, with regards to that. And here's the thing, speaking up, especially since around the year 2005, the past 20 years, has been absolutely transformational for millions of people, validating them, improving workplace culture and rules and laws, and also clearances for people who are working with children. There's so much good that has come out of speaking up, not just in the past 20 years, but really throughout history. However, that being said, not all outrage is created equal. And outrage over sexual harassment in the workplace does not equal outrage over your steak being overcooked at a restaurant. Okay? Outrage over sexual harassment in the workplace does not equal outrage over your steak being overcooked at a restaurant. But if in the age of outrage, those feel the same and they're reacted to it with the same vitriol and the same histrionics, then we've got a real problem. So I'm going to give you the 5 signs of outrage, the outrage culture, and then we're going to get into how it shows up at your school and then get into the strategies of what to do about this. So there's a few ways here, 5 signs of the age of outrage. Number 1, constant outrage as a feature, not just a rare occurrence. Okay? Constant outrage as a feature, not just a rare occurrence. So it used to be that we would get outraged as a society over something that was objectively offensive, unjust, and just mortifying and horrible. But now it seems like outrage is kind of like a default mode of communication. It's like I said, 0 to 100 instantly. Things that used to annoy us now we're outraged. I mean, probably most of the school leaders listening to this podcast have had a parent in the past year use the word to say outraged. I'm outraged that my child sat on the bench during the whole soccer game. I'm outraged that my child was not put into the advanced math class. I'm outraged that fill in the blank. Okay? So things that would be frustrating and annoying are now labeled as outrage. And so here's what I see. Complexity is no longer valued, and it just seems like everything becomes like a moral crisis and us versus them mentality. And so most issues are complex. Even whether or not the 7th grade boy got into the soccer game is complex. How many kids are on the team? What's the size of the opponents? What's the score? How far are we into the season? Did this 7th grader show up to practice the last week? Are they coming back from an injury? Like all of these, and that's not even like that big of a deal. My point is that as private school leaders, we deal with a lot of complexity, but complexity, in my opinion, is no longer valued, and everything becomes black or white, us versus them, parent versus school. And so the first sign of the outrage culture is constant outrage as a feature, not just a rare occurrence. And then number 2 is social media amplification. Social media amplification. So outrage spreads instantly and virally. And here's the key to all of this. I didn't even know this was a thing until about 3 weeks ago. I was talking to my 27-year-old daughter, and we were talking about this topic, and I was explaining how it just seems to me that everybody's mad on the internet. Everyone's upset. And she's like, well, Dad, there's a name for that. It's called rage bait. And I'm like, what's rage bait? And so she explained it to me, and then I looked it up, and it's basically influencers, people with social media following, that they will post specifically designed content that's specifically designed to provoke, a strong reaction. Usually anger, outrage, and like that kind of feeds into that whole hot take mentality with sports talk. But my daughter was explaining, and then I've looked into it, is that they'll pick a topic, and sometimes ChatGPT will pick the topic and help with the statement that is going to get equal anger on both sides of the issue. And what it does is it increases engagement. There's a lot more comments because this person's wrong, and I have to comment to like tell them that they're wrong. And there's more likes, there's more shares, there's more thumbs up, there's more thumbs down, there's more views. And that benefits content creators because of the way that those metrics of engagement drive the monetization of that platform. So this all works together. So my point is, I'm not saying everybody does that, but I am saying that social media platforms, they are incentivizing outrage. Okay, let me say that again. Social media platforms are incentivizing outrage because the more engagement, that makes the algorithm push out that person as suggested content into more algorithms. And here's the thing. You've heard people talk about the attention economy. You know what gets attention is anger. Anger gets attention. Outrage gets attention. When everyone's chill, everyone's laughing at this cute video of this baby goat or this dachshund or whatever, that gets some attention. The things that really drive up the clicks and the likes and the comments for sure is outrage. And so TikTok, Instagram, X, Twitter, they're really rewarding, like I call them performative takes or hot takes over thoughtful dialogue. You know, if there's two people talking on a long form content podcast about a topic, thoughtfully having a dialogue, that's not doing very well on social media. But things that are outrageous that get everybody fired up, they do really well. And then here's the other problem with the what I mentioned before, social media amplification, is that there's very little context. Everything is just a quick little soundbite or a phrase from a quote. There's very little accountability because of the username and the lack of, well, this is that person. And then there's very rarely like a desire to resolve anything. It's just like, I'm going to call out this person. We're going to cancel this person. We're going to pile on this person. So we lack context. We lack accountability. We lack a path to resolution with social media being rewarded, literally rewarded with money for the engagement. And what is engaging out there now is outrage. So I'm not down on social media. I like scrolling through Instagram and seeing the stuff that's in my algorithm as much as the next person, but I'm just saying that this has added to it. And I would just want to pause. Why are we talking about this? Why am I taking a deep dive into like the why behind this happens? Because you're the one as a private school leader that's dealing with the outcome. You're dealing with the outrage. You're dealing with the parent who is engaging with social media in a way where this is showing up in their algorithm, and they don't even realize that this is a thing that they do, but then that's showing up in their behavior towards you and your teachers at your school. And so just like we can have better conversations if we have empathy and understanding for what that parent's going through from a hopes and fears standpoint, I'm hopeful that me going deep kind of behind the scenes on this outrage culture can inform you so that you can be more empathetic, but also more informed and better equipped to deal with that outrage when it comes your direction. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense as to why is Mark spending so much time on this. Okay, so a couple more things that are evidence. Let's call it bombastic politics and polarization. You know, a lot of times political leaders, they didn't always talk about, you know, the issues, but it, you know, there's research to support that the negativity of the ads has increased each generation. You stir up that outrage, you rally your base, you get more fundraising dollars. Sometimes the campaign is about getting them to fear the opponent getting into office more than it is about the ideas of this person that's running for office, and so you got to stir that up. There's a lot of I found this phrase when I was researching this podcast episode, and it's called scorched earth rhetoric. Scorched earth rhetoric. And that probably lands for most of you. It's like, yeah, that kind of seems to be. And so if conversations, if civil disagreements, we agree to disagree, but I'm interested to hear why you think the way that you think. If that's been replaced with quote unquote scorched earth rhetoric, then we see everyone as a threat and not as someone that we can try to understand. And that middle ground has become a pretty risky place to stand. I want you to think about that for a second. Especially in politics, but in other things too, the middle ground has become shaky ground. And so it's like, pick a side, dude. Well, that kind of thinking is what, again, adds gasoline to the fire of this outrage. And so a couple more things that I think are contributing to the outrage culture is just a lot of anxiety. There's more people in America diagnosed with anxiety disorder than ever before. And there's more children under the age of 16 diagnosed with an anxiety disorder than ever before. So I believe that constant exposure to people being upset makes people react more and reflect less, which is not good for our mental health. What does it fuel? It fuels chronic stress, and the end state of chronic stress is burnout. You've heard me talk about that before. And then that squashes empathy. Forget about empathy if you're outraged. And then we've heard that word tribalism thrown around a lot over the past few years, especially in the political context. And it's that us versus them, okay? We feel like we have to pick a side. And then a lot of people feel like I got to pick a side. I got to fight for that side. I got to do it loudly. And if anyone disagrees with me, it's a personal attack on me, okay? Is any of this true? Is any of this sound like this is happening in your world, in American culture, that you're seeing this, you're hearing this? If people feel like they got to pick a side, they got to fight for it at full volume, and then if someone disagrees with them, you're attacking me. Okay? Didn't always used to be that way. And I'm not like saying get off my lawn like the good old days. No, I'm just shining a light on what is happening. And then the fifth and what I think is a really big problem here that's evidence of the outrage culture is that now this dynamic, instead of it just showing up in politics, it's showing up at school and in the workplace and at church and in our neighborhoods and in neighbor disputes with a neighbor. And for you as a private school leader, it's showing up in a bunch of different ways. So let's just take a quick look at that. How does outrage culture show up in private school parents at your school? All right. How about an email from a parent that takes a minor issue and turns it into like a moral emergency? A minor issue becomes a moral emergency. Okay, this math quiz was so unfair. I can't believe you're letting this happen in a college prep environment. You need to do better. You know, that could be an email to a math teacher. Could be an email to you and the math teacher is CC'd. Okay. A minor issue, a math quiz that their kid didn't do well on. And it turns into, as an organization, our school is doing a bad job. Okay. Then we get into what's other ways that it shows up. Public shaming on the parent Facebook group or in the parent group text. How about this one? My daughter was bullied in the school, did nothing, and nothing is in all caps with an exclamation point. If they can't protect our kids, what are we paying for? Okay. Or they could come talk to us, right? How about unreasonable demands tied to their political or ideological beliefs? A book in your library, a book on your reading list for 10th grade language arts, for example, okay? Instant gratification culture, soaked in outrage culture. If they don't hear back from you in a couple of hours, they're blowing up your inbox when you know that 24 hours is a reasonable response. And then they start emailing the head of school, or if you're a division head, or the board chair, and it's like, how do we go from 0 to like 1 million in a couple of hours? And then this is the one that's really showing up a lot with my coaching clients that I'm hearing about, is weaponized language and legal threats and threats to pull their kids out of the school. And so it's like, well, you're doing this, you're going to hear from our attorney. Or the most popular one, if you don't do this, we're going to pull our kids, or we're going to start looking for other options for our children. Weaponized language and threats. Okay, I want to pause and acknowledge that that's the bad news, okay? This is probably triggering for many of you that are listening. It's triggering for me, and it's like, ugh, yeah, all of that sounds right. And that's showing up at my school, and it's awful, and what are we going to do about it? Okay, well, like I said at the top of the episode, we can either throw our hands up and say, well, the parents are just that way, and that's how they're going to be, and I guess I just have to learn to live with it. Or we can get some strategies and we can try to make this better. So I'm going to give you 7 strategies to help you navigate outrage culture with the parents at your school. Okay. And again, while I'm pausing here, I just want to remind you that I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and I'm about to throw 7 strategies your way. That's a lot to remember, especially if you're multitasking, which I strongly encourage you do that when you listen to the podcast. And so I will take good care of you in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 148. I'll link that Harvard Business Review article. I'll link some other things there that can help you. Okay. Strategy number 1, lead with quiet confidence. So I want to tell you that I used to lead from a place of fear of parents earlier in my career. And I would worry about a small group of local parents and how they might react to something, and the tail was wagging the dog. And I regret that. And, I've talked a lot about outrage, and that's probably caused you to think about a couple of parents in particular, either current parents or former parents. But instead of leading from a place of fear, we need to lead with quiet confidence. And that confidence comes from self-awareness and regulating our autonomic nervous system and things like that. But I want to encourage you that your confidence can come from your family handbook, your employee handbook, your mission statement, your portrait of a graduate, your procedures for carpool, your athletic handbook, your guiding documents. Because I think that when we get all out of whack and we are just looking at that parent across from us, or reading that email, or listening to that loud voice on the phone, that we, understandably, our fight or flight response kicks in, and then we're reacting instead of responding. And so if our guiding documents are in good shape, and we have policies for these things, I'm not saying that fixes everything. I'm not saying that it's easy to talk about that. And I'm going to say in number 2 that I don't think that we should lead with that and just be like, well, it's our policy, it's our policy, it's our policy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can have more quiet confidence when you know that your leadership decisions are aligned with the core values of the school, the handbooks, the vision, the mission, and the portrait of a graduate. And that ultimately, if a parent isn't going to get on board with that, then they need to choose to go to another place where they can get on board with that school's policies. And I get it. I've also functioned from a place of fear with regards to enrollment, and it's like, oh man, I can't lose another kid. Okay. But if we kowtow to the parents and we give in and we roll over and we lead from a place of fear, I can tell you from experience what that leads to. It leads to anxiety and ulcers, feeling bad about myself as a leader, and having no confidence in myself as a leader. And so strategy number 1 is to lead with quiet confidence. Strategy number 2, lead with curiosity, not defensiveness. So when outrage is coming our way full blast from a parent, our first instinct might be to get defensive. That's usually my first instinct. And I gave into that instinct for many years, but I got better at kind of shoving that down later in my career. And so instead of starting with defensiveness and saying, well, this is our policy, I'm encouraging that we start with curiosity. So they're done talking, and this, I'll just pause, quick sidebar here. This guide that I mentioned, the 7 steps to having a productive meeting with an upset parent that I mentioned at the top of the episode, you can get it at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. It goes through all of this stuff. You don't interrupt, you let them talk. You start with, first of all, you validate their feelings, you acknowledge their concerns, and then you say something like, to bring it full circle to what we're talking about, curiosity, can you help me understand what led to this concern? Or tell me more about what you're seeing or from what you're hearing from your child, or what you're seeing yourself, when you're at the game, or so on and so forth. You want to get more information from them, because if you immediately get defensive and immediately say, well, our policy on page 18, blah, 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 it's going to escalate the emotion of the other person, and it's going to slam all the doors, lock the door, and throw away the key. But if we can just keep that door open for a little bit and keep that conversation going, when we listen and we don't interrupt, and when we validate their feelings and acknowledge their concerns, that doesn't mean we agree with a word that they said, but when we do that, in my experience, 90% of people, it lowers the temperature significantly. And I teach you how to do that in that guide, privateschoolleader.com/meeting. And so we're going to lead with curiosity. We're going to try not to get defensive. And we're just going to, say it like, okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say a parent storms into the school. They're upset that their child got a detention. And so instead of me immediately getting defensive and pulling out the handbook and saying, well, here's our discipline policy and I'm going to back up this teacher and blah, blah, I can tell that this is really important issue to you. I'd really like to hear everything from your perspective so that we can make sure we understand it fully, both of us, and then we can talk about it. So again, there's several examples in that guide of how to lead with curiosity and lead with empathy. So that brings us to strategy number 3. And strategy number 3 is establish clear communication norms. And I've talked about this before, but here's the thing. Outrage thrives in chaos. Outrage thrives in confusion. Outrage thrives when there's no guardrails. And so we need to create boundaries. We need to have clarity surrounding communication expectations, and whether that's response time for emails or how someone should raise a concern, like what's the method for the parent to, what's the channel for, if they know, okay, I'm not saying they're not going to vent online, but if your policy or your guidelines for communication norms, this is how you communicate with the school, if that's not clear and that's not put in front of the parents frequently and is very easy for them to access, they don't have to they don't have to go on a scavenger hunt through emails to find something from mid-July to figure that out. They are less likely to go start dumping all of that dirty laundry online. Make it easy for them as far as here's the process. So, repetition, back to school night, in the parent handbook, in an email. If there's a weekly parent memo, there's a link in there to the communication guidelines so that they can find that easily, and it gives the steps to, this is how, how we communicate as partners could be like the title of something that you put out there that is outlining how to use respectful language, the org chart or chain of command, please pause before you post on social media and reach out to us first. Like, if you had a little document or a paragraph or two in your handbook, and then that was linked in your weekly parent memo, how we communicate together as partners, for example. I'm not saying it's going to fix everything. I'm telling you that it is going to make it easier for parents to communicate in the correct way. And it also gives you something that you can refer to when you're correcting the bad behavior. Even though kids don't know that they want it, they want structure. Even though parents don't think they want it, they want structure. And if there's a system, then you can try to keep the communication inside those guardrails on that windy 2-lane road of parent-school communication. Okay, so I'm not saying here's what you should say, but I'm saying that you should have communication norms. You should repeat them often, and you should make them easily accessible for the parents. And then you should point back to them after there's bad behavior. Strategy number 4, build relational capital before you need it. Strategy number 4 is to build relational capital before you need it. Okay. So I've talked before, I did a whole episode, I'll link it in the show notes, how to make deposits in the emotional bank account of your teachers. Well, you can take what you learned in that episode and apply it to the parents, because you get the analogy. You're making deposits. When things aren't great, you need to write a check. You need to make a withdrawal. Is it going to clear? So if it's that 7th grade teacher and you've been pouring into her, and then you need to go talk to her about something kind of difficult, if that's the first conversation that you've had since you said hi at new teacher orientation, that check's probably not going to clear. But if you've been popping in and checking on her and, treating her like a human being first and as an employee second, and so on and so forth, well, the same is true with parents. And so it's really important for us to be proactive, and we feel like, I don't have time for this. But the last thing you probably want to do is once a month host an informal coffee and donuts with parents, because you're like, oh my gosh, like, do I really want to do that and then have them show up? You probably know who's going to show up. Or it could be radio silence from school and you're not visible, and then when things hit the fan, then that's when you engage. That's where I think the weekly parent memo comes in, and a little blurb from you at the beginning that's upbeat and positive. And I know not every school has the capacity to do that, but acknowledging parent concerns before they escalate. And I just think that being visible is a big deal. Being visible at arrival, being visible at dismissal. I'm not saying you can do that every day, but if you're only visible at events, that's good. But the more visible that you can be when parents are hanging around the playground after school, just those informal conversations, though they just build trust and a relationship. We tell our teachers, don't let the first communication that they get from the school be a negative one. I know you can't have a relationship with every parent, but we need to try to build relational capital with the parents before we need it. All right, quickly do the last couple here. Strategy number 5 is anticipate triggers and get out ahead of them. So what's going to trigger outrage? If there's a big decision coming up, if you know that there's a quote-unquote controversial book that's on the syllabus for 11th grade language arts, if that teacher sends out a note explaining the purpose and the relevance or and how it's going to be taught thoughtfully and appropriately, or if there's a clip from a movie that's going to be shown in social studies class, and the social studies teacher emails and says, okay, we're going to show these 3 minutes from the movie The Patriot. Yes, this is a movie that's rated R. However, blah, blah, blah. Like those are just some examples that come to mind, but it could be a big decision. And I'm not saying that you need to, like, again, live in fear of like how the community, the parent community is going to like react. But I just think that if there are times where we can clearly and calmly explain the why behind something, instead of parents hearing about it from their kid a week after the thing started. Proactivity builds trust. Silence makes people suspicious. Being proactive and communicative builds trust. When there's radio silence from the school, that breaks down trust. There's a narrative void. People are going to fill the narrative void. They're going to be suspicious. They're not going to trust authority. They're going to create their own narrative. So let's try and get out ahead of those triggers. Strategy number 6 is you model emotional regulation and you reframe conflict. So you're the leader. You set the tone. If you panic, if you yell, that's what's going to happen with the other people around you, the parents, the teachers. If you're steady, you're giving them permission to be steady. If you're calm, you're giving them permission to be calm. And you can use the conflict as an opportunity to deepen the relationship. I've had probably the thing that has caused deeper relationships between me and parents is how we navigated something together really, really difficult. This is going to be difficult. We're going to get through this together. Even when we disagree, I want us to remember that we're partners in this and we're going to partner with you. A parent threatens to withdraw their kid over some school policy. You don't have to argue with them. You just stay calm and you're just like, well, it's clear that this policy doesn't align with your values as a family right now. I mean, that's really hard. I respect you and your need to advocate for your child and your family. If you ever want to revisit the conversation, I'm here, but this is a school policy and we're going to follow it. And so if we hold the line and try to preserve the relationship, and I realize what I just said is really, really hard to do. If we can hold the line and preserve the relationship by being calm and steady, that's going to be contagious. But wild emotional reactions to parents and being super defensive and dysregulated, that is also contagious as well. And then finally, strategy number 7 is to read the book Hopes and Fears by Rob Evans and Michael Thompson. And you've heard me say it a million times on the podcast. I think that this book should be on the desk of every private school leader. They should reread it every year. It's an easy read, 165 pages. It's gold. It's a masterclass in understanding parents, how they think, their strategies for how to work with the 95% of parents that are mostly workable, and there's strategies for the 5%ers, the anxious and incompetent, the unresponsive, and the intimidators. And the intimidators are the ones that are going to overlap the Venn diagram the most with the Age of Outrage. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Contributing factors to the Age of Outrage: social media as an amplifying force, increased polarization and echo chambers, rapid spread of misinformation, anonymity and reduced inhibition, changing cultural norms around speaking up. Okay, so that's existing out there in American culture. Then there are some signs of this outrage culture. Outrage as a common thing, not just a rare occurrence. Social media, again, pouring gasoline on that. Polarization, bombastic politics, emotional fatigue, rise in anxiety. But then here's the big one: outrage migrates into everyday life. And so instead of it being in politics, instead of it being when there's a merger, instead of it being when someone gets fired from a job that they've been at for 20 years and there's a scandal, instead of there being outrage around those big and rare things, outrage is now living in all the nooks and crannies of everyday life. So what are the strategies? 7 strategies to help you navigate outrage culture with the parents at your school. Number 1, lead with quiet confidence. Number 2, lead with curiosity, not defensiveness. Number 3, establish communication norms and make them easy to access. Number 4, build relational capital before you need it. Strategy 5, anticipate triggers and get out ahead of them. Number 6, model emotional regulation. And number 7, read hopes and fears. And so your call to action, I know that's a lot, but to just pick one strategy and use it, or maybe to click on the link in the show notes and buy hopes and fears. I don't get any commission for that. That's a link right to the NAIS website. It's the cheapest place you can find it on the internet. I just want you to have that information, but you don't have to buy anything. You can make things better at your school with regards to this issue just by following 1 or 2 of these strategies. So just to wrap it up, a reminder, you can still grab Parent Academy for your plug-and-play PDs for August in-service. Go to privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And then something that's very applicable to our content today is to grab your free copy of the 7 steps to having successful meetings with upset parents at the privateschoolleader.com/meeting. And if you would please share this episode or this podcast with another leader in your life, a rising leader at your school. And I mentioned it before, but the show notes for today's episode at the privateschoolleader.com/episode 148. And I just want to say that I appreciate you. I am so thrilled that you're listening and wish you the best as you start your school year if you're listening in real time. And thanks so much for taking some of that precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.